I'm Sean, 32 years old, and I never imagined my perfect wedding day would end in disaster. One moment, I was dancing with my beautiful bride, Rebecca. The next, my sister Caitlin was screaming, champagne flying through the air, wedding cake smashed across the floor. Her words still echo in my head. This is what you get for acting like you're better. The worst part. My mom rushed to comfort her while Rebecca stood there in her ruined dress. I said nothing that night, but what I did next changed everything. Before I continue this story, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family drama unfolds. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, our family seemed perfect from the outside. Nice house, 2 cars in the driveway, family vacations every summer. My parents, though not wealthy, provided a comfortable life for me and my little sister Caitlin. I was 12, and Caitlin was 8 when everything changed. My father announced he was leaving my mother for his secretary Diane. Within 6 months, they were married and relocated to California, 3,000 miles away from us. My mother Evelyn was devastated. She had been a stay-at-home mom for most of her adult life, and suddenly she was thrust into the workforce with outdated skills and a mountain of emotional baggage. Despite my father offering child support, my mother refused out of pride. "We don't need his money," she would say through gritted teeth. This decision made things financially tight, but my mother was determined to show everyone she could manage alone. As the oldest, I quickly learned to step up. By 14, I was mowing lawns in the summer and shoveling driveways in the winter. I helped around the house, cook dinner when Mom worked late, and still maintained straight A's. While I took on more responsibility, my mother compensated for my father's absence by spoiling Caitlin. Nothing was ever denied to her. New clothes, the latest toys, extra dessert, extended curfews. My mother's reasoning was always the same: she's just a little girl who misses her daddy. I understood my mother's motivation, but the double standard was obvious. When Caitlin threw tantrums, my mother coddled her. When she brought home mediocre grades, my mother made excuses. "Not everyone is academically inclined," she would say, even though Caitlin spent more time on her phone than studying. Meanwhile, I was expected to excel at everything without complaint. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for my first year of college and secured scholarships for the rest. I chose a state university with a strong business program, living in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates to save money. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore while maintaining my GPA. My hard work paid off when I graduated with honors and immediately landed a spot in an accelerated MBA program. Caitlin's path was very different. She barely graduated high school and drifted through community college, changing her major 4 times in 2 years. Despite my mother working extra shifts to pay for Caitlin's education, my sister treated college like an extended social event. When Caitlin finally transferred to a 4-year university, I was 26 and establishing my career in finance. My mother asked if I could help a little with Caitlin's tuition. That little help soon became paying for everything: tuition, books, housing, and a monthly allowance. I didn't mind helping my family. My career was thriving, and I was making good money. But it bothered me that Caitlin never seemed grateful, never worked harder, and never tried to ease the financial burden. She would call me only when she needed something, usually prefaced with "Mom said you wouldn't mind." Everything changed when I met Rebecca. We worked for the same financial firm, though in different departments. We connected during a company retreat, and I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and quiet confidence. Rebecca came from a wealthy family but had insisted on making her own way. She had worked through college, earned her own scholarships, and climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination. My mother's reaction to Rebecca was lukewarm at best. During our first family dinner together, my mother spent most of the evening talking about Caitlin's creative spirit and how some people just aren't meant for conventional success. Rebecca was gracious, but I could see the subtle digs bothered her. Caitlin was even worse, rolling her eyes whenever Rebecca spoke and making snide comments about corporate robots. Despite my family's cold reception, Rebecca and I grew closer. After 2 years of dating, I proposed and she accepted. I thought my family would be happy for me, but their congratulations seemed forced. My mother immediately asked if Rebecca's rich parents would be paying for the wedding, and Caitlin questioned why we were rushing into things. As my relationship with Rebecca flourished, I began to see my family dynamics more clearly. I had enabled my mother's favoritism and Caitlin's entitlement for years. I had been the responsible one, the fixer, the bank. And for the first time I was prioritizing my own happiness, which seemed to threaten the system we had all grown accustomed to. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. Peace had always been my default, and I hoped that once they got to know Rebecca better, they would come around. Looking back, I should have known the wedding would be the breaking point. All the resentment, jealousy, and dysfunction that had been simmering for years was about to boil over in the most public and painful way possible. When Rebecca and I announced our engagement at a small family gathering, my mother managed a tight smile while Caitlin examined her fingernails with sudden interest. "Congratulations," my sister finally said, her tone suggesting she was acknowledging a minor achievement rather than a life milestone. That cold response was just the beginning of what would become 18 months of wedding planning drama. Rebecca's parents, James and Linda Thompson, insisted on paying for the wedding. "Our only daughter deserves her dream day," they said warmly. They were genuinely kind people who had built a successful real estate development company from scratch. Unlike the stereotype of wealthy people, they were down to earth and generous. Their offer should have been received with gratitude, but my mother interpreted it as a slight. "I suppose nothing I could provide would be good enough for her," my mother muttered, after meeting with the Thompsons to discuss initial plans. "Not all of us can afford extravagance." Rebecca had never once commented on our family's finances or expressed anything but appreciation for my mother's hospitality, yet my mother persistently painted her as a snob. As planning progressed, Caitlin's jealousy intensified. When Rebecca asked her to be a bridesmaid, my sister accepted with visible reluctance. "I guess I don't have a choice if I want to avoid family drama," she said, turning a kind gesture into an obligation. The first major incident occurred during bridesmaid dress shopping. Rebecca had scheduled an appointment at a boutique, arranging it weeks in advance to accommodate everyone's schedules. Caitlin texted 30 minutes after the appointment time. "Something came up. Can't make it." Later, Instagram told the real story as Caitlin posted photos from a brunch with friends at a restaurant 2 blocks from the boutique. When confronted, Caitlin dismissed it. "It's just a dress. Why is everyone so uptight about this wedding stuff?" Rebecca, ever diplomatic, rescheduled a private fitting for Caitlin, who arrived late and complained about every style option. Venue visits became another battleground. Rebecca and I had fallen in love with a renovated historical building overlooking the harbor. During our family tour, Caitlin pointed out every flaw. "This floor is uneven, the lighting is terrible, the acoustics will make the speeches impossible to hear." The venue coordinator, a professional with 20 years of experience, looked increasingly uncomfortable as Caitlin's criticisms mounted. The menu tasting should have been enjoyable, but Caitlin suddenly developed allergies to Rebecca's favorite dishes. "I can't believe you'd select something that could send me to the hospital," she accused, though these allergies had never been mentioned in the 24 years I'd known her. The caterer patiently offered alternatives, which Caitlin rejected for various reasons. Even the flowers became controversial. Rebecca had chosen a combination of white roses and blue hydrangeas, a simple but elegant arrangement. "White flowers at a wedding, groundbreaking," Caitlin commented sarcastically. "And aren't hydrangeas bad luck in some cultures?" They weren't, as the florist politely confirmed. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were planned for the same weekend in different locations. My friends organized a fishing trip at a lakeside cabin, while Rebecca's friends planned a spa weekend. Somehow, Caitlin convinced some of the bridesmaids that a spa was boring and redirected the bachelorette party to a series of nightclubs. Rebecca, not a big drinker or fan of loud music, endured a weekend that catered entirely to Caitlin's preferences. Throughout this period, Caitlin's financial demands increased dramatically. She needed a new car because her current one wouldn't look good in the wedding photos. She wanted to move apartments because her current place was too depressing, and she needed somewhere nice to prepare mentally for the wedding. Each request came with emotional manipulation. If you really cared about your family, or I guess Rebecca's comfort matters more than your sister's well-being. Despite my growing frustration, I continued supporting her financially. I paid the security deposit and co-signed the lease on a luxury apartment that was well beyond what a part-time barista should afford. I covered her tuition for another semester despite her being on academic probation. I even helped with the down payment on a newer car, though not the luxury model she had initially demanded. Rebecca noticed the pattern but approached it gently. "You know you don't have to say yes to everything, right?" she said one night after I'd approved another of Caitlin's requests. "I feel like she's taking advantage of your generosity." "She's family." I replied automatically, the response I'd been programmed to give since childhood. But Rebecca's observation had struck a nerve. Was I helping Caitlin, or enabling behaviors that would ultimately hurt her? The rehearsal dinner should have been my wake-up call. We had reserved a private room at an upscale restaurant with a strict start time to accommodate the 20-person party. Caitlin arrived 45 minutes late, slightly intoxicated, wearing a white dress that was suspiciously bridal in style. My mother immediately made excuses. Traffic was terrible, it wasn't, and she worked a double shift today, she hadn't. As Rebecca's father gave a heartfelt toast welcoming me to their family, Caitlin audibly snorted and whispered something to my cousin that made them both laugh. I saw the flash of hurt in Rebecca's eyes, and for a moment I considered confronting my sister. But with the wedding just hours away, I convinced myself to let it go. One more day of peace, I thought. After the wedding, I would establish some boundaries. I had no idea that after the wedding would arrive in such a spectacular and humiliating fashion. The morning of our wedding day dawned perfect, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze coming off the harbor. Rebecca and I had decided to stick with tradition and spend the night before apart. As I adjusted my tie in the hotel mirror, my best friend Marcus snapped a candid photo. "Looking sharp, man," he said with a genuine smile. "Today's the day everything changes." He had no idea how prophetic those words would be. The ceremony was everything we had hoped for. Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle in a classic A-line gown that took my breath away. Her father, beaming with pride, kissed her cheek before placing her hand in mine. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, and I noticed tears in the eyes of many guests. Even my mother seemed moved, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Caitlin, standing with the other bridesmaids, maintained a neutral expression throughout. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception area for cocktail hour while we took photos. Rebecca was radiant, laughing as the photographer directed us through various poses. "I can't believe we're actually married," she whispered during a quiet moment. "This is the happiest day of my life." The reception began smoothly. The historical building looked magical, with string lights draping from the exposed beams and candles flickering on each table. Our first dance went perfectly as we swayed to our chosen song, "At Last" by Etta James. The crowd applauded as I dipped Rebecca at the final note, both of us laughing with pure joy. Dinner was served, a 3-course meal that had taken months to plan. The speeches began with Marcus sharing funny stories from our college days, while still highlighting my better qualities. Rebecca's maid of honor spoke eloquently about their friendship and welcomed me to their circle. Throughout these moments, I noticed Caitlin making frequent trips to the bar, returning each time with a fuller glass of champagne. When Rebecca's father stood to give his speech, Caitlin was visibly swaying in her seat. My mother, seated beside her, seemed oblivious or deliberately ignorant of my sister's state. "Mr. Thompson spoke warmly about family values and the importance of supporting one another through life's challenges. "We couldn't be happier to welcome Sean into our family," he concluded, raising his glass. "To Rebecca and Sean." As guests echoed the toast, Caitlin muttered something loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I couldn't make out the words, but the shocked expressions of those around her told me enough. My mother patted Caitlin's arm soothingly, as if she were a toddler having a minor tantrum rather than a 24-year-old disrupting a wedding. The situation escalated when the DJ announced it was time to cut the cake. Rebecca and I stood before the 3-tiered creation, a classic design with subtle blue details that matched our color scheme. As I placed my hand over Rebecca's to make the first cut, Caitlin suddenly appeared beside us, champagne flute in hand. "Smile for the camera, perfect couple," she slurred, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Rebecca tensed beside me but maintained her smile as the photographer continued clicking. "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested quietly to Caitlin. "We can talk later." "Talk later," Caitlin's voice rose. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Later, later, later. Never now. Never when it matters." Guests were beginning to stare. The DJ awkwardly lowered the music volume. I placed a gentle hand on Caitlin's arm, attempting to guide her away from the cake table. This isn't the time or place. That's when she jerked away from me and raised her champagne glass. A toast to my brother, she announced loudly, who always does everything right. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect wife from a perfect rich family. Before anyone could react, she flung the contents of her glass directly at Rebecca. Champagne splashed across my wife's white dress and face, leaving her gasping in shock. In the moment of stunned silence that followed, Caitlin wasn't finished. She turned to the wedding cake and shoved her hand straight into the middle tier, grabbing a fistful and smashing it onto the table. "This is what you get for acting like you're better," she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "Always the good son, always the successful one, always looking down on me." The room froze in collective shock. Then, as if the situation couldn't get worse, my mother rushed forward. Not to restrain Caitlin, not to apologize to Rebecca, but to embrace my sister protectively. "It's okay, sweetheart," she cooed, stroking Caitlin's hair as if she were the victim. "She just needs to let it out," my mother explained to the horrified onlookers, as if this behavior were a natural emotional release rather than an inexcusable attack. Rebecca stood perfectly still, champagne dripping from her hair, her dream dress stained. Her parents rushed to her side with napkins and supportive words. My father-in-law looked ready to physically remove Caitlin from the premises, but Rebecca gently restrained him with a hand on his arm. "Not now, Dad," I heard her whisper. "Let's not make it worse." Marcus and several groomsmen quickly surrounded Caitlin and my mother, diplomatically, but firmly escorting them to a side room. The DJ, showing remarkable presence of mind, immediately raised the music volume and announced the opening of the dance floor, attempting to redirect the guests' attention. Rebecca's bridesmaids surrounded her, helping her to the bridal suite to assess the damage to her dress. I stood alone by the ruined cake, my mind blank, with shock and mounting anger. Rebecca's mother squeezed my arm as she passed. "Go check on your wife," she said firmly. "We'll handle this." In the bridal suite, Rebecca was remarkably composed. The worst of the champagne had been blotted from her dress, though a faint stain remained. "It's okay," she said when she saw my face. "It's just a dress." "It's not okay," I replied, my voice tight with controlled rage. "None of this is okay." Rebecca took my hands in hers. "We have two choices right now. We can let this ruin our wedding day, or we can go back out there and show everyone that we're stronger than this drama. This day is about us, Sean, not about Caitlin." Her strength amazed me. We returned to the reception where the staff had removed the damaged cake and served the remaining portions. Our guests, taking cues from our composure, gradually returned to celebrating. Caitlin and my mother had apparently left the venue entirely. As we danced, mingled, and tried to salvage our special day, Rebecca leaned close to my ear. "When we get back from our honeymoon, something has to change," she whispered. "I love you, and I'll support whatever you decide, but this can't continue." I nodded, knowing she was right. For too long I had enabled the dysfunction in my family, prioritizing temporary peace over necessary boundaries. As Rebecca and I swayed to another slow song, guests watching us with sympathetic smiles, I made a decision. The cycle would end now. "I'll handle it," I promised my new wife. "Starting tonight." She raised an eyebrow. "Tonight? We leave for our honeymoon tomorrow." "Some things can't wait," I replied, already mentally calculating exactly what needed to be done. "Trust me." By the time we returned to our hotel room that night, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day, my plan was fully formed. While Rebecca showered and prepared for bed, I sat with my laptop, making a list of every financial tie between myself and my sister. The wedding day disaster had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. And clarity, I was discovering, could be a powerful motivator for action. I woke up at 5:30 the next morning, careful not to disturb Rebecca as I slipped out of bed. Our flight to Bali wasn't until late afternoon, giving me just enough time to execute my plan. I opened my laptop at the small desk in our hotel suite and pulled up a document I had created the night before: Caitlin Financial Inventory. The list was longer than even I had realized. College tuition deposit for the upcoming fall semester, $4,000. Co-signed lease on her luxury apartment, $2,000 monthly. Car insurance premiums, $200 monthly. Credit card in my name that she was authorized to use. Average $3,000 monthly. Direct bank transfers for emergencies approximately $1,000 monthly. Cell phone on. My family plan, $120. Monthly. Streaming services on my accounts, $60 monthly. Health insurance supplement, $400 monthly. All told, I was spending over $7,000 monthly supporting my 24-year-old sister who worked part-time by choice and consistently failed her classes. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't helping her. This was crippling her. My first call at exactly 8 o'clock when offices opened was to the university financial department. I need to withdraw a tuition deposit, I explained calmly to the administrator. After verifying my identity and confirming I was indeed the payer on the account, they processed my request. The $4,000 would be refunded to my account within 3 business days. Next, I visited the bank in person as soon as they opened at 9. I froze the joint checking account I had established for emergencies and removed Caitlin as an authorized user on my credit card. The banker, a woman about my age, processed the requests without comment, though her expression suggested she'd seen this scenario before. At 10, I met briefly with a lawyer I had previously consulted for investment advice. What are my legal obligations regarding the apartment lease? I co-signed, I asked after explaining the situation in broad strokes. You're liable for the rent if your sister doesn't pay, he confirmed. But you can contact the landlord and explain the situation. They might allow you to pay a penalty to remove your name, especially if you find a replacement tenant or your sister agrees to add another co-signer. I called the property management company next. The leasing manager was surprisingly understanding. Family situations can be complicated, she said diplomatically. We can freeze the current lease and require a new application with a different guarantor if your sister wishes to stay. Otherwise, she'll need to vacate within 30 days, and yes, you'll be responsible for any damages or unpaid rent. Throughout the morning, my phone buzzed constantly with text notifications from Caitlin. Why aren't you answering? Mom is freaking out about last night. It wasn't that big a deal. Rebecca seems like she can take a joke. You always overreact. Can you transfer me some money? The car needs new tires. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my checklist. I canceled the automatic payments for her car insurance, removed her from my cell phone family plan with a 30-day notice, and changed the passwords on all the streaming services. By noon, I had effectively cut off every financial tie, except the apartment lease, which would take more time to fully resolve. I met Rebecca for lunch at a quiet restaurant near our hotel, feeling lighter than I had in years. You look different, she observed, studying my face. What have you been doing all morning? I explained my actions in detail. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Are you sure about this? She asked. I know they're your family. That's exactly why I'm doing it, I replied. Real family doesn't exploit each other. Real family wants each member to grow and thrive. What I've been doing is enabling dependence and entitlement. Rebecca nodded slowly. I support you completely. But be prepared for the backlash. It will get worse before it gets better. As if on cue, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. After 12 ignored calls, I decided it was time to answer. Sean, finally. Where have you been? Caitlin is hysterical. She says her card was declined at the grocery store, and the bank says you removed her from the accounts. There must be some mistake. Her voice held the familiar tone of assumed authority, as if I were still 12 years old and had misbehaved. I took a deep breath before responding. There's no mistake, Mom. After what happened at my wedding, changes needed to be made. You can't be serious. Her voice rose an octave. She made a little scene, yes, but she was emotional. Weddings bring up complicated feelings. You can't punish her financially for having emotions. This isn't punishment, I explained calmly. This is a consequence. Caitlin is 24, not 14. Throwing champagne at my wife and destroying our wedding cake goes beyond a little scene. But even if that hadn't happened, this change was overdue. I've been enabling her dependence for too long. My mother's voice turned cold. So that's it. Your fancy new wife decides your real family isn't good enough, and you just cut us off. This has nothing to do with Rebecca, I stated firmly. This is about establishing healthy boundaries that should have existed years ago. Caitlin needs to learn independence and responsibility. She'll have to drop out of school. She'll be evicted. Is that what you want? What I want is for my sister to grow up. She has options. She can get a full-time job. She can apply for financial aid. She can find roommates for a more affordable apartment. There are consequences to her actions, and it's time she experienced them. My mother's voice turned tearful, her final manipulation tactic. You're destroying this family. Your father left us and now you're abandoning us too. The comparison stung, but I held firm. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm still here, still willing to have a relationship. But the financial support has ended. After I hung up, Rebecca looked at me with concern. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I finally answered. For the first time in a long time, I think I actually am. We finished lunch and returned to the hotel to prepare for our honeymoon flight. As we packed the last of our things, Rebecca suddenly wrapped her arms around me from behind. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I know that wasn't easy. I turned to face her, overcome with gratitude for her understanding and support. The hard part's just beginning, I acknowledged, but it's necessary. As we headed to the airport, I turned off my phone, knowing the barrage of calls and messages would continue. For the next 2 weeks, Bali would be our sanctuary. But I was already planning what would happen when we returned, because cutting off support was only the first step. The real challenge would be rebuilding my family relationships on healthier terms, if that was even possible. Our honeymoon in Bali was exactly what we needed: 2 weeks of beaches, temples, and complete disconnection from the drama at home. The resort had spotty cell service, which gave me the perfect excuse to keep my phone off most of the time. When we landed back in Boston, reality crashed back instantly. My phone, once powered on, buzzed continuously for nearly 5 minutes with accumulated notifications. 57 missed calls, 123 text messages, 32 voicemails, and dozens of social media notifications. The missed calls were primarily from my mother and Caitlin, with a few from extended family members who had apparently been recruited to their cause. The text messages told the story of Caitlin's escalating panic and anger as she discovered each financial change. My card was declined. Call me ASAP. The apartment office says you froze the lease. What the hell? The school says my tuition deposit was withdrawn. Is this a joke? I can't believe you're doing this to me over a stupid wedding prank. Mom is absolutely devastated. I hope you're happy. Your wife put you up to this, didn't she? She never liked me. Call me back, you coward. The voicemails followed a similar pattern, starting with confusion, escalating to anger, then attempts at guilt, and finally desperate bargaining. My mother's messages were particularly manipulative, ranging from, I raised you better than this, to I've been having chest pains from the stress you're causing. Rebecca scrolled through some of the messages on the taxi ride home, her expression a mixture of disbelief and vindication. Wow, she murmured after listening to a particularly vitriolic voicemail from Caitlin. And they wonder why you needed boundaries. We had barely settled into our apartment when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, arms crossed, expression grim. I braced myself and opened the door. So you finally decided to come home, she said, by way of greeting. While you were off enjoying your luxury vacation, your sister has been suffering. I stepped back, allowing her to enter, but refusing to take the bait. Would you like some coffee, Mom? She ignored the offer, pacing our living room like a prosecutor, preparing an opening statement. Caitlin had to borrow money from friends to buy groceries. The apartment complex gave her a warning about late rent. Her phone service was cut off. And you think this is appropriate? I think it's the natural consequence of her behavior, I replied calmly. She's an adult who made choices. Adults face consequences for their choices. This is Rebecca's influence, my mother accused, glaring at my wife, who had quietly entered the room. You were never this cruel before her. That's enough, I said firmly. Rebecca has nothing to do with this decision. In fact, she's shown more understanding toward Caitlin than most people would after having their wedding deliberately ruined. My mother's face flushed. It was not deliberate. She was emotional. Mom, she threw champagne at Rebecca, destroyed our wedding cake, and screamed insults in front of 200 people. Then instead of apologizing, she asked me for money the very next day. This isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern that's gone on for years. The argument continued for nearly an hour, covering familiar ground. My mother cycled through her usual tactics, minimizing Caitlin's behavior, maximizing my supposed betrayal, invoking family loyalty, questioning Rebecca's character, and finally her trump card: your father would be ashamed of you. That one nearly broke my resolve. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how little my mother understood me. My father, who had abandoned his family for a younger woman, had no moral standing to judge anyone's family loyalty. After my mother left, slamming the door behind her, Rebecca held me in silence for a long moment. "You did well," she whispered. "Stay strong." The next morning I discovered Caitlin had taken the battle public. She had posted a long, carefully edited account of the situation on social media. My brother cut me off financially without warning because I accidentally spilled a drink at his wedding. Now I might be homeless and have to drop out of school. Blood isn't always thicker than water, I guess. The post had dozens of sympathetic comments and shares. Several mutual friends texted me, asking what was going on, if there was more to the story. Some took sides immediately, either condemning my cruelty or defending my right to establish boundaries. Family members I rarely spoke with suddenly had strong opinions about my personal decisions. I chose not to engage publicly. Social media isn't the place to resolve family matters, I told Rebecca as she read me the latest comments. Responding would only feed the drama. While Rebecca and I settled back into our work routines, Caitlin escalated her campaign to restore her financial support. Her tactics ranged from transparent to downright concerning. First came the fake apology text: "I've been thinking about what happened, and I'm really sorry. I was just emotional and had too much to drink. Can we talk?" When I agreed to meet for coffee the following weekend, she seemed to take this as a sign that money would resume flowing, and canceled with a flimsy excuse. Next, she enlisted our Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, to call and remind me of family obligations and how your mother sacrificed everything for you kids after your father left. When this approach failed, my cousin Tim tried the man-to-man angle. "Dude, she's your little sister. You can't just cut her off cold turkey." When the family pressure campaign didn't work, Caitlin moved to threats. "If you don't reinstate my tuition, I'll have to drop out. Is that what you want on your conscience? Your sister being a college dropout because of your petty revenge." I held firm through each attempt, maintaining the same message: "I'm happy to have a relationship with you, but the financial support has ended." The situation reached a new low when Caitlin showed up at my office building during lunch hour. I was returning from a sandwich shop when I spotted her pacing near the entrance, clearly agitated. Before I could decide whether to approach or avoid her, she saw me. Finally, she exclaimed loudly, drawing the attention of several colleagues entering the building. "Your sister has to track you down at work because you won't answer her calls." I gently guided her away from the entrance, aware of the curious glances. "Caitlin, this isn't appropriate. I'm at work." "Nothing else was getting your attention," she snapped. "I need money for rent. They're going to evict me." "We can discuss this later, not here," I insisted. "So you'll help?" Her expression brightened immediately. "No, I'll talk. The financial support is still over." Her face contorted with rage. "You selfish bastard. You have plenty of money. You just spent thousands on a fancy honeymoon while I'm eating ramen and might lose my apartment." As her voice rose, more heads turned our way. Mortified, I tried to defuse the situation, but Caitlin was beyond reason. She continued her tirade until security approached, asking if everything was all right. "No, everything is not all right," Caitlin spat. "My brother is trying to ruin my life." Eventually, I had to return to work, leaving Caitlin still fuming on the sidewalk. My boss called me into his office that afternoon. I braced for a reprimand about the scene, but his approach surprised me. "Family troubles?" he asked sympathetically. I nodded, embarrassed. "Sorry about the disruption earlier." He waved away my apology. "Someone sent us a video of your wedding. It made the rounds in the office last week. That was quite a situation you handled there." He leaned forward. "Setting boundaries isn't easy, especially with family. Take it from someone who learned that lesson too late." His understanding was unexpected and deeply appreciated. Meanwhile, my mother had begun complaining of various health issues: migraines, high blood pressure, insomnia, all allegedly caused by worry over Caitlin and distress at my abandonment. These reports came through flying monkeys, family members who would casually mention, "Your mother was in such pain yesterday she could barely get out of bed." Despite the persistent guilt trips, I maintained my position. Rebecca and I enjoyed a brief weekend getaway to Cape Cod, a much-needed respite from the ongoing drama. During a peaceful walk on the beach, I found myself reflecting on the long-term implications of my decision. "What if they never come around?" I asked Rebecca. "What if this permanently damages my relationship with my mother and sister?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "That's possible," she acknowledged. "But ask yourself, this was the relationship you had healthy. Was it reciprocal, or was it based on financial dependence and emotional manipulation?" Her questions were uncomfortably perceptive. "I guess I've been buying their affection for years," I admitted, "and it wasn't even working." When we returned from our weekend away, I had a surprising voicemail from my father. We spoke occasionally, usually brief birthday or holiday calls, but hadn't had a substantive conversation in years. "Sean, it's Dad. Your aunt mentioned what's happening with Caitlin. I know we don't talk much, but I'd like to discuss this if you're willing. Call me when you can." I returned his call that evening, unsure what to expect. After awkward pleasantries, he got to the point. "Your mother called Diane in tears, saying you've abandoned the family." Knowing your mother, I figured there was another side to the story. I gave him the unvarnished truth about Caitlin's behavior at the wedding and the years of financial dependence leading up to it. He sighed heavily. "I owe you an apology, Sean. When I left, I put you in an impossible position. You became the man of the house too young, and your mother clearly transferred all her expectations to you." The acknowledgement, 20 years overdue, hit me hard. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I see you repeating a mistake I made," he replied. "I enabled your mother's spending for years to avoid conflict. By the time I finally set a boundary, the relationship was too damaged to save. You're doing the right thing with Caitlin, but do it for the right reason, because it will ultimately help her grow, not because you're angry about the wedding." His insight was surprisingly valuable. "So you think I should stay firm?" "Absolutely. But keep the door open for a real relationship if that's what you want. Just make it clear that money is no longer part of the equation." After we hung up, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The wedding disaster, painful as it was, had forced necessary changes that had been brewing for years. Now I needed to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with my family moving forward, if any. 1 week after returning from our honeymoon, I scheduled a meeting with my mother and Caitlin. Grand Brew Coffee Shop, 8:40 a.m. sharp, my text specified. "I have something important to discuss." I chose the early time deliberately, knowing Caitlin rarely woke before 10. Her attendance would require actual effort, a small test of seriousness. I arrived 20 minutes early, with a folder of documents, and secured a corner table away from other customers. The coffee shop was busy with morning commuters. Grabbing their daily caffeine fixed the bustle, providing a buffer of white noise for what would likely be an emotional conversation. At 8:39, my mother walked in, her expression a careful neutral. She had clearly made an effort with her appearance, hair freshly styled, makeup precise. I recognized the tactic, an attempt to convey that she was the composed, reasonable party in this conflict. A minute later, Caitlin slouched through the door, looking deliberately disheveled in contrast. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back messily, wearing a wrinkled Boston University sweatshirt. Her visual statement was equally clear: "See how I'm suffering because of you." "Thank you for coming," I said as they sat down. I had already ordered their preferred drinks, a vanilla latte for my mother and an iced mocha for Caitlin. This small gesture of consideration seemed to momentarily disarm them. "What's this about Sean?" my mother asked, her tone suggesting this meeting was an inconvenience rather than her idea of a reconciliation opportunity. "Are you finally ready to discuss reinstating Caitlin's support?" "I want to talk about the future," I replied calmly. "Our future as a family." Caitlin rolled her eyes. "Save the lecture. Either you're helping me financially or you're not. The apartment manager is threatening eviction, and registration for next semester closes in 2 weeks. I nodded, acknowledging her concerns without reacting to her tone. "I understand your situation is precarious right now. That's partly why I wanted to meet." I opened the folder and removed several documents, placing them neatly on the table. My mother and sister exchanged confused glances. "What is all this?" my mother asked suspiciously. "The real news," I replied. "My response to everything that's happened." I slid the first document toward them. "This is the deed to a small condo in Somerville. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, nothing fancy, but in a safe neighborhood with good public transportation access. I purchased it last week as an investment property." Their expressions shifted from confusion to cautious interest. Caitlin reached for the deed, examining it closely. "What does this have to do with me?" "I'm offering it as a residence for you, Caitlin. The monthly costs would be significantly lower than your current apartment, and the location is actually closer to campus." Before hope could fully bloom in her eyes, I continued. "There are conditions." I slid the next document forward. "This is a basic rental agreement. You would be a tenant, not an owner, with specific responsibilities and expectations." Caitlin's face darkened. "So you're my landlord now. That's your solution." "Please let me finish," I said firmly. "The condo is just one part of what I'm proposing." I presented the third document. "This is paperwork for an educational trust I've established. It will cover your tuition and basic educational expenses, but with stipulations you must maintain at least a C average to attend all classes and meet regularly with an academic advisor." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "You're treating your sister like a child with all these rules and conditions." "No," I corrected gently. "I'm treating her like an adult who needs structure and accountability. There's a difference." I continued with the fourth document. "This outlines a monthly allowance that will be deposited into a new account. It's roughly 1/3 of what I was previously providing, an amount that covers basic necessities but requires supplementation through employment." Caitlin's expression wavered between resentment and calculation as she mentally assessed whether this new arrangement would be worth accepting. "The fifth item isn't a document, but an opportunity," I explained. "My colleague Michael runs a marketing department that needs a part-time administrative assistant. The hours are flexible around class schedules, the pay is competitive, and there's potential for growth if you show initiative. He's willing to interview you next week." "So I have to work now?" Caitlin asked, as if the concept were foreign. "Most adults do," I replied without sarcasm. "It's actually quite fulfilling to earn your own money." My mother, clearly processing this unexpected approach, leaned forward. "What's the catch, Sean? Why are you doing all this after saying you were cutting her off?" I met her gaze directly. "Because cutting someone off completely isn't the only alternative to enabling them. I want to help Caitlin become independent and successful, not dependent and resentful. But there are conditions beyond what I've already mentioned." I placed the final document on the table. "This is a behavioral contract. It includes several non-negotiable terms." I turned to Caitlin. "First, you will personally apologize to Rebecca and her family for what happened at the wedding. A genuine, specific apology, not a generic, 'sorry if anyone was offended.'" Caitlin stiffened but didn't object. "Second, you will attend weekly therapy sessions. I've researched several qualified therapists who specialize in family dynamics and personal growth. You can choose which one you prefer, but attendance is mandatory for continued support." My mother interjected therapy. "There's nothing wrong with Caitlin that requires therapy." "Mom," I said gently, "what happened at my wedding wasn't normal behavior. Neither is the dynamic we've developed as a family. We could all benefit from professional perspective." Before she could argue further, I continued. "Third, this arrangement is probationary for 6 months. If the terms are violated, particularly regarding Rebecca or academic performance, the support ends immediately. If things go well, we can discuss adjustments that grant more independence as it's earned. And fourth, there will be a cooling-off period. No contact between us for 30 days while you consider this offer, and begin therapy if you accept. We all need space to reset our dynamics." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Caitlin stared at the documents, conflict evident in her expression. My mother looked torn between outrage at the conditions and relief that I wasn't completely abandoning her daughter. "This feels like punishment," Caitlin finally said, her voice smaller than I'd heard in years. "It's not punishment," I replied. "It's a pathway to a healthier relationship for all of us. A relationship where you have all the power," she countered. "I've always had the financial power, Caitlin. The difference is I'm now using it to encourage growth rather than dependence. Eventually, the goal is for you to not need my support at all." My mother, who had been flipping through the documents with increasing agitation, suddenly slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like some benevolent dictator. We're your family, not charity cases to be managed." "That's exactly the problem, Mom," I said, maintaining my calm. "You've treated me like an ATM for years, not a son or brother with feelings and boundaries." When Rebecca was publicly humiliated on what should have been the happiest day of our lives, your first instinct was to comfort the person who caused the pain, not the victims of it. Something in my words seemed to penetrate her defenses. She sat back momentarily speechless. "I was 12 when Dad left." I continued, my voice softening. "I grew up fast because I had to. I took on responsibilities, got jobs, helped around the house, all while maintaining perfect grades, because I knew college was my only path to security. I didn't resent it then because I loved you both and wanted to help." Caitlin was looking down at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. But somewhere along the way, helping turned into enabling. My support became expected, then demanded. My success became something Caitlin resented rather than aspired to. And you, Mom, encouraged that resentment because it was easier than holding her accountable. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but for once they seemed genuine rather than tactical. "I just wanted to protect her," she whispered. "After your father left, I couldn't bear to see either of you hurt again." "But you did hurt us," I replied gently. "By treating us so differently, you taught Caitlin that tantrums get rewarded and responsibility gets taken for granted. You set her up for frustration when the real world doesn't work that way." Caitlin, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally looked up. "Is that how you see me? As some spoiled brat who can't function in the real world?" I considered my answer carefully. "I see you as someone with potential who's never been challenged to fulfill it. I see my little sister, who used to draw amazing pictures and write creative stories before she decided that academic effort wasn't cool. I see someone who's been told her emotions justify any behavior no matter who gets hurt." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for the first time in years they didn't seem manipulative. "I was so jealous," she admitted in a choked voice. "Everything always came so easily to you. Good grades, good job, good relationship. I felt like I could never measure up." "Nothing came easily," I corrected her. "I worked incredibly hard while you were sleeping in or partying. I made sacrifices while you were spending my money on designer clothes. The difference wasn't ability, Caitlin. It was effort and accountability." My mother reached for Caitlin's hand, but instead of her usual enabling comfort, she said something surprising. "He's right, sweetheart. I didn't do you any favors by shielding you from consequences." The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange our family had experienced in years. There were tears, recriminations, and painful acknowledgments on all sides. I admitted my role in enabling the unhealthy dynamic by taking the path of least resistance. My mother acknowledged her favoritism and the damage it had caused. And Caitlin most surprisingly admitted that her behavior at the wedding had been inexcusable, driven by years of insecurity and entitlement. "I was awful to Rebecca from day one," she confessed. "She never did anything to deserve it. I just hated that she seemed so perfect, so put together. Next to her, I felt like a mess." By the time our coffee cups were empty, the morning crowd had thinned. We had talked for nearly 3 hours, covering ground that had been avoided for decades. Nothing was fully resolved, but seeds of understanding had been planted. "I need time to think about all this," Caitlin said, gathering the documents I had brought. "Take the time you need," I replied. "The offer stands, but remember, the old arrangement is over regardless of what you decide." As we prepared to leave, my mother hesitated, then hugged me awkwardly. "I'm sorry, Sean," she whispered, "for everything." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. As I watched them leave the coffee shop, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since the wedding disaster. Real change would take time, consistent boundaries, and probably more difficult conversations. But the wall of denial had finally cracked, and that was a necessary first step toward healing. 6 months after our coffee shop meeting, I sat in my living room watching football with Marcus while Rebecca prepared dinner in the kitchen. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find Caitlin standing there with a small gift bag. Right on time, I noted with approval. Punctuality had been a struggle for her, but she was making progress. Therapy has me setting 3 alarms now, she replied with a self-deprecating smile. She handed me the gift bag, 6-month anniversary of the new arrangement. Thought it deserved acknowledgement. Inside was a framed photo of Rebecca and me dancing at our wedding the moment just before the chaos erupted. The original photographer's file had been digitally restored to remove any evidence of the cake disaster that followed. It was thoughtful and symbolic. "This is really nice, Caitlin. Thank you." The past 6 months had brought remarkable changes. After initially resisting, Caitlin had fully embraced the conditions of our new arrangement. The weekly therapy sessions initially attended grudgingly had become a cornerstone of her personal growth. Her therapist, Dr. Angela Martinez, had helped her identify patterns of behavior stemming from childhood experiences and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Academically, Caitlin had thrived with clear expectations and consequences. Her GPA had risen to a solid 3.2, and she had finally settled on a major in communications with a minor in graphic design fields that actually suited her natural talents. The part-time job with my colleague Michael had evolved into a position she genuinely enjoyed. Her natural creativity and social skills, previously channeled into drama and manipulation, were now assets in a professional environment. Michael had even mentioned the possibility of sponsoring her for an internship program after graduation. Most significantly, her relationship with Rebecca had transformed. The required formal apology delivered at a tense dinner 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting had been awkward but sincere. Rebecca, ever gracious, had accepted it without reservations. Since then, they had developed a cautious friendship, occasionally meeting for lunch or shopping without my presence. My mother had undergone her own journey of self-reflection. After initially blaming me for forcing therapy on Caitlin, she had eventually sought counseling herself. Her sessions revealed deep-seated insecurities about her worth after my father's abandonment and how those insecurities had manifested in her parenting decisions. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly with more honest communication than we'd ever had before. Thanksgiving dinner hosted at Rebecca's parents' home had been the true test of our progress. James and Linda Thompson had been understandably apprehensive about including Caitlin, but Rebecca had convinced them to give her a chance. The evening had proceeded without incident, even including moments of genuine warmth and laughter. When Caitlin presented Rebecca's mother with a handmade thank you card, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. "Dinner's ready," Rebecca called from the kitchen, interrupting my reflections. "Marcus, are you staying?" "Wouldn't miss it, my friend," replied, patting my shoulder as he passed. "Your wife's cooking beats takeout any day." As we gathered around the table, I observed the easy conversation flowing between Rebecca and Caitlin about an art exhibit they had recently attended. My sister was engaged, articulate, and noticeably more confident than she had been 6 months ago. The defensiveness that had characterized her interactions for years had diminished significantly. Later, after Marcus and Caitlin had left, Rebecca and I settled on the couch with glasses of wine. "She's like a different person," Rebecca observed. "I never thought we'd get here." The boundaries helped, I acknowledged, but the real change came from her. She had to want it. The experience had taught me profound lessons about family dynamics and personal growth. First love doesn't mean endless enabling. True love sometimes requires difficult boundaries that allow people to experience natural consequences and develop resilience. By financially supporting Caitlin unconditionally, I had actually impeded her growth and contributed to her sense of inadequacy. Second, healthy relationships require mutual respect and accountability. For years, I had accepted disrespect and manipulation to maintain peace, creating a dysfunctional pattern that harmed everyone involved. Breaking that pattern, though painful, was necessary for authentic connection. Third, patterns established in childhood can persist for decades if left unexamined. My mother's favoritism, my overcompensation, and Caitlin's entitlement had roots in our father's abandonment and the insecurities it created. Understanding those origins didn't excuse destructive behavior, but provided context for addressing it effectively. Fourth, healing is rarely linear. There had been setbacks along the way, arguments, relapses into old patterns, moments of doubt. Caitlin had missed therapy appointments twice and temporarily lost allowance privileges. My mother had occasionally slipped into enabling behaviors. I had sometimes been too rigid in enforcing boundaries. But the overall trajectory had been positive because we remained committed to the process. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's never too late to rebuild. What had seemed like irreparable damage after the wedding disaster had actually become the catalyst for necessary change. Sometimes relationships need to break completely before they can be reconstructed on healthier foundations. "Penny, for your thoughts," Rebecca said, noticing my contemplative mood. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," I replied. "The wedding day disaster might have been the best thing that could have happened to my family, as terrible as it was in the moment." She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. Sometimes the things that seem catastrophic in the moment turn out to be turning points. "Your sister smashing our wedding cake might have saved your relationship with her in the long run." I nodded, appreciating her perspective and forgiveness. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to the holidays with my family this year." As Rebecca and I enjoyed the peaceful evening, I felt genuine gratitude for the difficult journey we had navigated. The wedding day disaster that had seemed so catastrophic had ultimately been the breaking point my family needed to rebuild on healthier terms. By standing firm, when it would have been easier to give in by offering structured support rather than unconditional enabling, I had helped create the conditions for genuine change. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you balance compassion with necessary consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my journey from wedding day disaster to family healing. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful growth. Until next time, remember that true family support means wanting the best for each other, not always giving in to what's easiest in the moment.